The night was electric, not with the usual clamor of confrontation, but with a charged, expectant silence that hung over the studio like a tangible force. Under the harsh glare of studio lights and amidst the hum of high-definition cameras, Barron Trump took his seat at the center of the debate stage. Millions of viewers across the nation had tuned in, expecting a televised battle of booming voices and explosive rhetoric. Yet, as the debate was about to begin, an unmistakable calm radiated from Barron, a calm that would soon redefine what it meant to lead. Across from him, his opponent, a man notorious for his fiery temperament, rapid-fire insults, and theatrical outbursts, paced restlessly. His every movement was a burst of kinetic energy. His eyes flickered with barely concealed fury, and his hands gesticulated wildly as if trying to physically carve his points into the air. In stark contrast, Barron sat composed and measured. His tailored suit was immaculate, his expression was serene, his gaze unflinching. In that moment, it was clear that Barron was not here to meet the noise with noise. Instead, he exuded a quiet strength that seemed to promise substance over spectacle. The moderator's introduction was deliberate and solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he intoned in a deep, resonant voice, "tonight we gather to confront some of the most pressing challenges of our time: divisiveness, leadership, and the role of empathy in our society. Please welcome our esteemed guests." As the camera panned slowly over the stage, the opponent erupted in boastful declarations and aggressive posturing, while Barron simply offered a polite nod, a gesture that spoke volumes of his confidence in his own measured approach. The opening question landed like a hammer on an anvil. "What is the root cause of our nation's growing divisiveness?" The moderator's voice, even and authoritative, set the stage for what was expected to be a fiery exchange. Almost immediately, Barron's opponent launched into a tirade, his voice rising in anger. He decried the erosion of traditional values, lamented the loss of national unity, and blamed the failure of leadership on a society unwilling to stand up and fight. His words were loud and heavy, each sentence punctuated with angry gestures that sent ripples of tension through the studio. Then came Barron's turn. A profound hush fell over the room, as if the very air was waiting with bated breath. Slowly, Barron leaned forward, his eyes briefly locking with his opponent's, acknowledging the man's passion without meeting it with hostility. He then turned his steady gaze toward the camera, addressing every viewer as if speaking directly to their heart. "I believe," he began in a soft, deliberate tone that contrasted sharply with the earlier din, "that our strength is not measured by the volume of our voices, but by the clarity and compassion of our understanding. When we raise our voices in anger, we drown out the possibility of true dialogue. But when we choose to listen, to speak softly yet thoughtfully, we begin to find common ground." His words, each one carefully chosen, rippled through the audience like a gentle wave washing over jagged rocks. The stark difference between the two speakers could not have been clearer. While one relied on bluster and fire, Barron relied on quiet conviction. With each subsequent round of questioning, Barron's measured responses cut deeper than any shouted retort. He allowed long pauses between his words, pauses that seemed to invite reflection and understanding rather than reaction. At one point, the moderator shifted the focus to leadership during crises. "In times of turmoil," the moderator said, "should leaders not be bold and unyielding?" The opponent seized the moment, launching into a monologue about the necessity of strong, forceful leadership. His voice thundered across the stage, his hands cutting aggressive arcs in the air as he argued that only by being loud and assertive could leaders command respect and prompt action. Yet when it was Barron's turn to respond, the atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. Rising slightly from his chair, Barron's eyes shimmered with a quiet resolve as he addressed the question in a voice that was as soft as it was powerful. "True leadership," Barron said slowly, "is not measured by the force with which one shouts, but by the strength found in silence. It is in the moments when we listen, to the concerns of our citizens, to the hopes and fears of our neighbors, that we discover the true path forward. Anger may capture attention for a moment, but it is only through calm, thoughtful reflection that we build bridges and heal our divisions." As he spoke, a hush fell over the studio. The opponent's furious outbursts began to falter. Even the moderator seemed to lean in, drawn by the quiet magnetism of Barron's words. The live audience, initially split between raucous cheers and skeptical murmurs, gradually found themselves captivated by this different kind of force, a force that did not demand to be heard by shouting, but by inspiring others to listen. Between rounds, the mood in the studio shifted subtly. The opponent's face, once flushed with indignation, began to betray signs of frustration. His usual arsenal of insults and personal attacks, designed to disrupt and overpower, fell flat in the wake of Barron's quiet assurance. The camera often lingered on Barron's steady expression, a man who chose to speak only when every word could carry meaning, who let silence speak for him when words alone could not suffice. At one juncture, the moderator posed a particularly poignant question about the role of empathy in resolving national crises. Can true leadership emerge from compassion, or is it only forged in the crucible of confrontation? The opponent roared. Leaders must be bold, they cannot be soft. They must inspire through decisive, powerful action. His voice, booming and forceful, filled the studio with raw aggression. Yet when Barron spoke, the entire atmosphere shifted. I believe that the most courageous act a leader can take is to listen, to allow the voices of the people to be heard, even when those voices speak softly, he said, his tone steady and resonant. In our most trying times, it is not the clamor of anger that brings us together, but the quiet, unwavering commitment to understanding one another. His words resonated deeply. Every listener in the room, whether in the front row or behind the camera, felt the weight of that truth. It was as if the debate had transcended its role as a mere political contest and had become a lesson in humanity. The opponent's angry rhetoric, which had once seemed so dominant, now appeared hollow in contrast to the power of a measured response. The debate's final round approached, and the moderator, sensing that the tide had turned, invited the participants to offer closing remarks on the future of the nation. Barron rose slowly, his gaze sweeping across the audience as if he were connecting with each person individually. I may speak softly, he said, but I believe that our ideas and our hearts deserve to be heard. Let us choose to build bridges over walls. Let us find strength in listening, in empathy, in understanding. For it is through our collective quiet resolve that we can mend the divisions that have long separated us. Those closing words lingered in the charged air long after the cameras faded to black. Outside, the reaction was immediate. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #QuietStrength and #ListenAndLead. Clips of Barron's gentle yet powerful responses were shared, replayed, and discussed for hours on end. Analysts marveled at how a debate that was expected to be a cacophony of anger had transformed into a masterclass in quiet leadership. Pundits argued that Barron's approach had not only defused the situation but had redefined what it meant to be a leader in a divided society. In the days and weeks that followed, the silent debate became a topic of conversation in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms. People questioned the efficacy of confrontation, debating whether a softer, more thoughtful approach might indeed be the key to overcoming societal discord. Interviews were conducted, articles were written, and every mention of the debate served as a reminder that sometimes the strongest message is delivered not by those who shout the loudest, but by those who choose to speak with quiet conviction. Back in the quiet of his study that night, Barron sat alone, reflecting on the events of the evening. The silence that had defined the debate was now a comforting presence, a reminder that true strength lies in restraint. He reviewed every moment in his mind, each pause and each measured word, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. In a world where chaos often reigned and anger was celebrated, his deliberate choice to listen and then speak thoughtfully had set him apart. It was a reminder that leadership isn't about overpowering others, it's about uplifting them, about forging connections even in the midst of conflict. For millions of viewers who had watched that night, the debate became more than a television event, it became a symbol of hope. It taught them that even in a world saturated with noise, one quiet voice could resonate louder than 1,000 shouts. That night, as the final images of the debate faded from screens across the nation, a simple truth remained: true class, true strength, and true leadership are measured not by the volume of one's voice but by the depth of one's character. In the wake of the debate, the ripple effects were swift and profound. News outlets across the country replayed Barron's measured responses, dissecting his every word in panels and on air. Social media exploded with admiration for his calm demeanor. Hashtags like #QuietStrength, #ListenAndLead, and #BarronSpeaks began trending, and millions of viewers shared personal stories about times when a gentle word had made all the difference. At local cafes and community centers, people discussed the debate with renewed hope. In one suburban town, an elderly woman recalled how a quiet conversation with a neighbor had once eased her loneliness. In another city, a group of young activists gathered to debate the merits of empathy over aggression. The conversation was no longer about partisan politics. It had become a broader reflection on the nature of dialogue in a divided world. Barron's opponent, whose angry tirades had dominated the early rounds of the debate, found his usual support waning. Public opinion began to shift as his aggressive style was contrasted with Barron's thoughtful articulation. In op-ed pieces and televised discussions, pundits argued that the future of political discourse might well depend on leaders who chose to listen rather than to shout. In academic circles, professors referenced the debate as a case study in the power of restraint. Seminars were held where students analyzed Barron's speeches, identifying the deliberate pauses and the careful inflection that conveyed more meaning than any bombastic outburst could. What we learned from Barron, one professor noted in a lecture at a prominent university, is that effective communication isn't about overwhelming your audience, it's about inviting them into a dialogue. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Barron's own reflections grew more personal. Late at night, in the quiet of his study, he would replay the debate in his mind. He recalled each pause, each gentle word, and considered the philosophy that had guided him. It wasn't a matter of being timid or soft. It was a conscious decision to embrace a higher standard, a belief that dignity and empathy could forge paths to reconciliation even in the most turbulent times. In his journal, Barron wrote, "I have always believed that true leadership is not found in the loudest voices but in those who remain steadfast amid the chaos. Tonight I saw that the power of silence can speak louder than any storm of words. It is a reminder that our shared humanity is the foundation upon which we must build our future." Those words, recorded in the quiet solitude of his late-night reflections, would later become a touchstone for many who sought to emulate his example. The impact of the debate also reached into the realm of policy and public sentiment. Political leaders began to reconsider the value of measured discourse. In town hall meetings and legislative sessions, a new emphasis was placed on listening, on creating spaces where even the softest voice could be heard without being drowned out by noise. Debates that once devolved into shouting matches now saw moments of reflection and genuine exchange of ideas. Barron's influence was felt not just on television but in the corridors of power, as his example inspired a movement toward thoughtful dialogue and inclusive decision-making. As the days turned into weeks, the silent debate became a cultural phenomenon. Documentaries were commissioned to explore the phenomenon, with interviews from viewers, scholars, and even political opponents who admitted that they had been moved by Barron's approach. Social media influencers and bloggers discussed the moment as a turning point, a demonstration that in an era dominated by loud, reactionary rhetoric, there was immense power in calm, deliberate thought. One particularly moving moment came when a young voter posted a video on a popular social platform, recounting how Barron's words had changed the way she interacted with her family during heated political discussions. "I used to believe that the only way to be heard was to shout," she said softly. "But now I understand that true strength lies in listening. Barron showed me that even when you speak quietly, your words can have a profound impact." The video went viral, sparking further debate and discussion about the nature of communication in modern society. In interviews that followed the debate, Barron continued to champion the power of quiet reflection. "I have learned," he would say, "that every time we choose to listen rather than to shout, we create a space for understanding. It is in these moments of genuine dialogue that we find solutions to our greatest challenges." His interviews were marked not by bombast, but by a measured tone that resonated with viewers from all walks of life. For Barron, the silent debate was not merely an isolated event, it was a catalyst for change. In his public appearances, he began to incorporate more moments of deliberate silence into his speeches, inviting his audience to pause and reflect on the deeper issues at hand. His message was clear: in a world overwhelmed by noise and polarization, the most powerful action one can take is to remain calm and listen. The legacy of that historic night reached even further. Community leaders across the country began to adopt the principles of the silent debate and local initiatives. Town hall meetings were redesigned to allow for longer, uninterrupted speaking times. School curricula were updated to emphasize the importance of active listening and respectful dialogue, and even corporate boardrooms started to value the quiet, thoughtful input of employees over the louder, more aggressive voices. Barron's influence, however, was not without its critics. Some argued that his approach was too passive, that it risked being interpreted as a lack of conviction. Yet even among his detractors, there was a grudging admiration for the strength it took to remain silent in the face of overwhelming noise. "It takes a lot of courage," one commentator noted, "to hold your ground when everyone else is shouting." And indeed, that was the lesson that resonated most, that true strength, true class, is measured not by the decibels of one's voice but by the depth of one's character. As the months passed, the silent debate became a symbol, a reminder of the power of quiet resilience and the enduring impact of thoughtful leadership. In academic research, it was cited as a turning point in political communication. In public discourse, it inspired a new generation of leaders who sought to bridge divides through empathy rather than anger. Barron's legacy, forged on that debate stage, became a touchstone for those who believed that a better world was possible if only we learned to listen. Late one evening, as Barron sat by the window in his study, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, he reflected on the journey that had begun that night. "In our lives," he wrote in his journal, "we are often defined by how loudly we speak, by the force with which we try to impose our will on the world. But tonight, I was reminded that the softest voice can echo the loudest in the hearts of those who need to be heard. It is not the volume of our declarations, but the sincerity of our intentions that shapes the future." Those words, simple and unadorned, captured the essence of the silent debate. They became a mantra for those seeking to break free from the cycle of noise and conflict, a call to embrace the power of silence, to listen deeply, and to speak only when every word can make a difference. And so, as the lights dimmed on that historic night and the final images of the debate faded from screens across the nation, one truth remained indelible: that in a world overrun by the clamor of strife, the quiet, resolute voice of a true leader can ignite a revolution of understanding, a revolution that begins with a single, powerful silence. In the days and weeks following that historic night, the world seemed to shift imperceptibly toward a quieter, more reflective tone. Barron Trump's measured words and unwavering composure during the debate had ignited conversations that transcended politics. Everywhere, from the high-rise boardrooms of corporate giants to small living rooms in suburban neighborhoods, the message spread: true strength is found not in the force of one's voice but in the calm clarity of one's character. For Barron, the aftermath of the debate was as transformative as the event itself. Each morning, as he sipped his coffee in a sunlit study lined with books and personal mementos, he found himself replaying the moments of that night in his mind. He recalled the way his opponent's fury had gradually diminished in the wake of his quiet conviction, the silence that followed his every deliberate word, and the way viewers across the nation had paused to listen. It was as if a single, soft-spoken voice had the power to disrupt an entire culture built on volume and vitriol. Barron began receiving letters from ordinary citizens. A retired teacher from a small Midwestern town wrote that his words reminded her that listening can be a revolutionary act. A college student from New York, disillusioned by the constant barrage of political noise, shared how the debate had inspired him to launch a campus initiative focused on dialogue and active listening. Even political pundits, once dismissive of his style, admitted in interviews that the debate had set a new benchmark for civility in public discourse. On social media, hashtags such as #QuietStrength and #BridgingTheDivide flooded the timeline, accompanied by heartfelt posts from people who longed for a return to thoughtful conversation. Within legislative circles, the debate's influence was felt in unexpected ways. Several lawmakers, inspired by Barron's example, began advocating for reforms aimed at promoting more respectful debate and collaboration in government. In committee meetings and public hearings, lengthy periods of silence, once considered awkward, were now embraced as moments for reflection. One influential senator even cited Barron's closing remarks in a speech, urging colleagues to replace the clamor of confrontation with the promise of understanding. It was a subtle but significant shift. The culture of politics was beginning to value listening over noise, thoughtfulness over theatrics. Barron himself found solace in his growing realization that leadership was more than just winning an argument. It was about setting an example for how to engage with the world. In his private journal, he wrote, "Last night, I learned that true leadership is not measured by the volume of one's words, but by the depth of one's silence. In that silence, I heard the voices of countless souls yearning for unity, and I understood that every moment of restraint is a chance to heal." Those words became his mantra, a reminder that every public encounter was an opportunity to lead by example. Yet the journey was not without challenges. The debate had unsettled many entrenched in the old ways of political combat. Some critics, still enamored with bluster, decried Barron's approach as weak or naive. Television pundits on cable news launched segments questioning whether a quiet demeanor could truly move mountains in a divided society. However, as days turned into weeks, the initial clamor began to give way to a more measured conversation about what kind of leadership the country truly needed. Academic institutions began to incorporate discussions of the debate into their curricula, analyzing how thoughtful discourse could serve as a foundation for sustainable progress. Barron's personal life, too, took on new meaning in the wake of the debate. Invitations to speak at community centers, universities, and corporate retreats began to flood in. Yet, despite the growing public attention, he remained committed to his quiet way of life. In one intimate gathering at a small library in a quiet suburb, a group of local leaders sat with Barron around a long oak table. Over cups of steaming coffee, they discussed the importance of empathy, the art of listening, and the need for collaboration in an era defined by polarization. Barron listened more than he spoke, nodding thoughtfully at each story, each idea shared. In that room, his presence was a soothing counterpoint to the relentless noise of the modern world. At home, Barron's family noticed subtle changes as well. His children, once accustomed to the background hum of televised controversies, began to ask him questions about what it meant to truly listen and be present. His spouse remarked that the quiet strength he displayed on stage had brought a new sense of peace into their daily lives. Family dinners, once punctuated by the usual debates over trivial matters, transformed into moments of reflective conversation where each person felt heard. It was as if Barron's calm had a ripple effect, spreading warmth and understanding even in the most ordinary settings. In the public sphere, media analysts pointed out that the silent debate had become a watershed moment in political communication. In an age where sound bites and viral moments dominate, one analyst wrote in a widely read editorial, "Barron Trump's calm, measured responses remind us that the most enduring ideas are those spoken with clarity and sincerity. His example challenges us to rethink what we value in our public discourse." Such observations echoed across newspapers, blogs, and online forums, where people debated the merits of a quieter, more reflective style of leadership. The influence of that night eventually extended to unexpected corners of society. In a small town in the Midwest, a local radio station began hosting quiet hours, segments where callers were invited to share their thoughts without interruption, fostering a space for genuine dialogue. In urban centers, community leaders organized listening sessions, where residents from diverse backgrounds would come together to discuss local issues in a respectful, measured environment. These initiatives, inspired by Barron's approach, underscored a growing realization that meaningful change begins when we choose to listen rather than to shout. One evening, several months after the debate, Barron was invited to a roundtable discussion hosted by a prominent civic organization. The room was filled with community activists, educators, and business leaders. As the conversation turned to the state of political discourse, one participant asked, "How do we create a culture where everyone feels heard, even if their voice isn't the loudest?" Barron paused, his gaze thoughtful, and replied, "It starts with each of us making a conscious choice, not to compete in volume, but to share our truths with humility. When we let silence speak, we open the door to understanding, and that is where true progress begins." That simple statement resonated deeply, earning nods and murmurs of agreement from around the table. In that moment, the power of silence as a catalyst for change was unmistakable, a quiet revolution born out of the refusal to engage in the endless clamor of anger. Back on television, the legacy of the silent debate continued to influence new formats of political discussion. Several talk shows began experimenting with extended pauses, allowing guests to reflect before answering, and even the most contentious debates softened as participants began to emulate Barron's style. Critics who had once dismissed his approach were forced to acknowledge that there was a kind of strength and restraint that had long been missing from modern discourse. Barron, however, remained humble throughout it all. He never sought to be a celebrity or a spokesperson for an entire movement. Instead, he continued to focus on the principles that had guided him that fateful night: integrity, empathy, and the belief that true leadership is built on the foundation of listening. In interviews, he would often say, "I'm not here to dominate the conversation. I'm here to make sure that every voice, no matter how soft, is given the chance to be heard." As the months turned into years, the silent debate became a legend, a symbol of a turning point in how society valued dialogue. Barron's quiet defiance had redefined what it meant to lead, not by overpowering others, but by offering a steady, thoughtful presence in a world awash with noise. His example inspired a generation of leaders who learned that sometimes the most revolutionary act is to remain silent until your words carry the weight of conviction. In the quiet of his study, long after the cameras had dimmed and the applause had faded, Barron often reflected on that transformative night. "The world is loud," he wrote in one of his journals, "but in that noise, our true voices risk being lost. Tonight, I chose to speak with silence, not because I was afraid to shout, but because I believe that even the softest voice can spark change when it is rooted in truth and compassion." Those words, simple yet profound, encapsulated the essence of his journey, a journey from confrontation to connection, from discord to dialogue. And so, as the legacy of the silent debate continued to ripple through society, one truth remained: in a world overwhelmed by noise, the quiet strength of a measured, thoughtful voice can inspire hope, bridge divides, and ultimately, change the course of history. Barron Trump's calm, collected demeanor had not only won a debate, it had sown the seeds for a future where understanding and empathy triumph over chaos and division. The memory of that night, the memory of a debate where silence spoke louder than shouts, endured in the hearts of those who believed that true leadership is measured not in decibels, but in the depth of one's convictions. It was a reminder that every moment of calm can be a catalyst for change, and that sometimes, the most powerful way to influence the world is simply to listen, reflect, and speak only when every word matters.